We are streaming. And if we're all set to go, welcome everybody. We're just getting wound up here with today's show, running into the fog number 46 today. And light up the chat, y'all who are on the bridge. We'd love to see some volunteer interlocutors join us here in a second. So if you guys are ready, Derek, you want to kick us off?
Gonna hit the record button.
3, 2, 1.
All right. I guess we're ready to roll with episode 46 of Running Into the Fog today, Eric. How are you?
I couldn't be better. I'm living the dream. I get to hang out with my kid brother all day, every day if I want to. What could be better?
What exactly is going on there with that shirt of yours? I think that's one I haven't even seen before.
This is new, actually. I found this online, as you might, but it's this cute little bunny rabbit, but the caption below, I will cut you, just said to me, serious but whimsical, sort of the way, and that's how I think of our guest today, Rob Duncan. Serious but whimsical. He won't cut you though, but he is a lot more fun than a bunny rabbit with a balloon. Derek, why don't you lead us into intros here?
Awesome. Well, Dr. Rob Duncan, coming to us from Vancouver, Canada. Rob, thanks so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Yeah, we actually, for those of you joining the live stream here today or listening to the playback as this becomes available in the archives of Running Into the Fog, you might be interested to know that we were supposed to have Rob on June 21st. So we did a setup for this podcast 6 or so weeks ago, around the 17th of June. We were going to get together, and then I think you came down with COVID, or at least a light form of COVID, Rob, and we had to push this back to today, August the 9th. Did I have most of that correct?
Yes, and thanks for being able to do that. I appreciated your accommodations very much.
Yeah, well, we appreciate you being here with us and your willingness to see us in the fog, so to speak. So going back about 6 weeks, we talked about how your background is rooted in market research. You then transitioned into competitive intelligence. You have a text that I think came out around 2008 or so.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
It's called Competitive Intelligence, Fast, Cheap, and Ethical. I was joking with you in the setup for today that usually when you hear those two words, fast and cheap, the next one is good, and you're asked to pick two. I think you would say that with regards to fast, cheap, and ethical, you can have all three, and that is the basis of how you've written this text that came out 14 or so years ago. Can you expand a little bit on that here as we get started with our jam session today?
Definitely. Yeah, I think you can have all three for sure. And I think one of the things there's certain precepts, I think, in the book, and one of them is fast beats slow. So if I can learn a little bit about something quickly, it's probably more useful to me than building out a big program. It's going to take a lot of time, a lot of resources. So fast beats slow, and cheap basically beats expensive. And I think that, often constraints do breed ingenuity. So sometimes when we constrain ourselves and we say, okay, what's the least amount of intelligence around a situation we could gather and still have an effective result? It kind of goes to that whole idea that you can do something quickly, which is better than slow. You can do something inexpensively, which for various reasons can be better than expensively. And you can always do things ethically. I mean, that can be just your brick wall that you don't go beyond. So that was the constraint in the book, is how can you get all three of these things? By using the skills you have, and your observation skills, your listening skills, your research skills, using the internet or what have you, traditional market research methods, surveys, focus groups, all of that. How can you get something that is useful and actionable for yourself?
Nice. Eric, you had a chance to meet Rob many years ago, I think, thanks to introduction that our mutual friend Fred Wergeles might have enabled. You expand a little bit on when you first met Rob. What was your impression? What was the setting?
Well, Rob, the years all run together when you get to be our age, don't they? But I do fondly remember your presentation regarding your trip around the Cape of Good Hope. Was it? Do I have that right?
Cape Horn, actually.
Cape
Yeah.
Horn, excuse me
Yeah.
for that,
No worries.
wrong continent, right? But what a tremendous story that was, and I just really found you very, very electrifying speaker. And by the way, Rob and I were both presenting. I think it was on collaborative innovation at the Connecticut Skip chapter that Fred Wergeles was running at the time on Yale's campus, if I recall correctly. I remember the places and the people, but I don't remember what year it was. But maybe I'm just trying to be polite. Anyway, you just struck me as such a fascinating guy, and I've followed your career since then. Your filmmaking in particular, and not only are you an author as a creator, but you're also a very accomplished filmmaker, award-winning filmmaker. I'm going to throw your IMDb profile up here in a minute, if it's all right with you, as well as a couple excerpts from your Amazon profile and stuff like that. But talk to me about sort of how you got into the competitive intelligence world. What is it that brought such a diverse life experience as Rob Duncan into the CI world in the first place? And then what's maintained that curiosity over the years?
A great question. Thank you. And thanks for the awesome intro in the background. And I do remember those speaking engagements with you, which is great. As far as competitive intelligence, it's a bit of a story because when I was doing my MBA at York, there was a consulting group there that did market research. And that was the classical survey research, focus groups, and what we used to call desk research or secondary research back then. So finding out facts to help small businesses. And I ended up working for that. It was a target of mine. I wanted to work at that consulting group. I thought that's why the school was cool. And I wanted to get involved with that. So when I showed up, I started volunteering to take on surveys, to do some phone surveys and, so basic classic market research, intelligence gathering. And then I got to be the manager of that group as I was graduating. So for a year, I was able to understand all aspects of that little enterprise and be involved in a lot of different research projects. So fast forward several years, I was in management consulting for a while, but I always had that market research background. And one of the companies I worked for was a strategic consultancy. So we were always considering, what are the forces at work in an industry? What are the forces at play inside, outside a company, that kind of thing? What are synergies between two organizations? Those kinds of things. So that stuck with me. And then when I moved out to Vancouver, I got back into market research and started from there. And I then was invited to teach. I applied and was invited to teach market research at the BC Institute of Technology, BCIT, very good school. And I did that for many years. Now, that's where I bumped into CI as a separate discipline. It's not that the tools didn't exist previously, but it was just really coming into its own as a named discipline, I felt. And I'll be honest with you, marketing research is not always the most exciting course in a student's portfolio of courses. And I saw CI as a great way to bring a sense of raciness to the curriculum. So I started to reframe the research we were studying as intelligence gathering, and then bring in more specific techniques that I was picking up from folks like yourselves and, from Fred, from Ben Gilad. I did a masterclass with them. So I was learning all of this great stuff from all of these wonderful minds, and I was able to put it into the course. And so as that course evolved, it eventually became a separate course, separate second research course, if you will, that focused a lot on competitive intelligence. So that's kind of how I got there. And then I really loved being a part of SKIP, loved going to the conferences, loved speaking, listening to folks like yourselves.
I brought up the first page of chapter 1 of your book on curiosity here, because I think that is, the fundamental character trait that is prerequisite for all great intelligence analysts is curiosity. And, you cited here as one of the main chapter points, it's the foundation of all good CI, and ultimately, provide methods to improve competitive intelligence acumen and how it gets done. Talk to me a little bit about curiosity as a character trait and how that connects you now to, we leap ahead to this sort of Web3 era where you're doing crypto projects and NFTs and all of that fun stuff, which, by the way, I'll segue to when we come back after your answer.
All right. That sounds good. I think I've always been curious. So that's probably why I've been kind of a lifelong learner. Even as a kid, I was really curious. I would go, was really, really interested in rocks, if you can relate. So I had a great rock collection and I'd go anywhere to find rocks, cool rocks. So I've always been curious. And at a point, I started to get curious about how individuals think and curious about people. Why does that person like this particular shirt color? And, how do animals think? And more laterally, how do machines think? Do they think, first of all? And if so, how do they think? So theories of mind, theories of what I sometimes think of as mindedness. What are things that have mindedness and what is making them tick? And, that serves me as an actor, which I've done for a while as well, which is, how does my character think? What's the mental machinery in this individual? And, there's an actor's calculus you'll hear expressed a bunch of different ways. And it basically is, who's my character? What do they want? And what are they going to do to get it? And they're usually in opposition to other characters. So there's that dynamic going on. And again, I find it interesting because I've always followed my brain wherever it leads in terms of interest. And I'm surprised how everything chains together to some degree, definitely backwards, but also forwards. And I found it does revolve a lot around curiosity and making models and mental models and trying to figure out what is the machinery at work in this particular process, person, machine, animal. I'm fascinated by squirrels. I like observing what they do. Crows is another one. And it goes back to that childhood curiosity as to what's going on here and why.
Well, and, I'll just observe before Derek takes over, that's the element of all good storytelling. And as a good storyteller, if you don't care about your characters, you aren't going to have a very good story as a result.
Definitely.
Rob, I was just going to add 6 weeks ago when we did the initial setup for today, like I started out saying at the start of the podcast, we talked about the power of creating a really strong storyteller narrative and that power of the story. I think that's really what you guys are talking about. How that translates then to creating a powerful narrative that is grounded in facts as well as solid analysis is something that competitive intelligence professionals have to do every day, right? They have to understand what's going to resonate with that stakeholder and how am I going to deliver this narrative rooted in facts and solid analysis to them. You went on, I may have the order of these mixed up, but you got your doctorate in collaboration via social media. And you just got done talking about how you've always been curious about people. Can you expand a little bit on what drove you to that choice for your doctorate and how it sort of maybe molded some of what you were doing or starting to do in this field 14 plus years ago?
Definitely. Yeah, another great question. Thank you. What drew me to the doctorate was I was really curious about, I think my initial interest was in organizational silos and how departments don't tend to talk as effectively as they could amongst one another. That had been something I'd seen earlier in my career as a management consultant, that some of the facilitation work we were doing when I was younger was around trying to get these departments to open up and talk to each other. Then came along LinkedIn. And for those of you who remember the earlier days of LinkedIn, there was this forum called Q&A. And it was essentially just ask anything and see how everyone responds to it. And it was really interesting because people would come up and they would share dilemmas or problems, problems they were working, and get all this input from people all around the world from different walks of life, the artist and the physicist and the senior manager and so on and so forth. And I was once again fascinated with curiosity and mindedness. What is going on here that these people can work across organizational boundaries and work towards solving problems and be more innovative? And that ended up being the title of my thesis, was really about trying to prove that idea sharing, question sharing, dilemma sharing through forums like LinkedIn, does it lead to improved problem solving and a greater sense of collaborative innovation? And I was able to show that it did through my survey and interview research and the background research as well. So that's kind of how the doctorate comes into play there. And then what intrigued me to study that more was really, again, that curiosity about what is going on here with all this mind sharing. With all this thought partnering, is this cool? Is this the kind of thing that can be harnessed for good?
Mm-hmm. It's really fascinating. When you think about all that is demanded of you when you put a film together, that is truly as we described in our setup to today, that's fog inducing, right? You have in the true kind of tone of this podcast, you must have to step through a certain degree of fog when you're trying to consider all the different actors and characters that you're trying to portray in this movie and whatever the script might be. For our listeners here on this episode 46, can you describe a little bit about what that process is like for you, Rob? Obviously, you've been doing it for years. What it is like today, I'm sure, is much more smooth than what it might have been like, 5 to 10 years ago. But can you go a little bit deeper just on that? I'm curious about it myself.
Absolutely, yeah. So I think, like a lot of people, I started out as an actor, and I trained in that in midlife. Basically, I said, I've been doing a lot of presentation, public speaking. I dig teaching. I like being in front of a crowd. What is that really about? And I realized I've never really considered acting, the pure substance that you get a high off of, interacting with public. And so I did, and I went to New York and I studied acting at the Stella Adler Studio, which is kind of a nice, fantastic storied place to study. Marlon Brando went through that place. And, there's all this wonderful history and story, and the people there are great. So I studied acting and then came back and got in films. Indie films, typically, that's my scene. It's films that people can make with the material they have at hand, and as an actor, I started watching, being a curious intelligence gathering kind of person. I started watching what everybody else was doing. And at first I thought, wow, I'm glad I'm just the actor, because these people really know how to do a whole lot of stuff. But over time, I realized, I probably could do that thing. And I bet I could do this bit. And, that the director seems to be actually having some kind of fun there. I bet that would be neat. And I think this is a very, very often told story, is that people come into film in a specific role and then start to grow out into all the different other roles. And I finally got a chance to make a short film with people that I had met through the process of being part of other people's short films. And it's a great leap for a filmmaker when you can make your first film with other people involved. And that was great. And I was very lucky, because I think I knew from that belief of mine that constraint breeds ingenuity, that if I could set it in one location, I'd have a better shot at getting things done. So those are principles that I've always kind of kept with me. Like, how can I simplify this? How can I get the essence of the story across, but in a way that's going to minimize headache, minimize fog? One location, I can count on the weather on any given day. If it's an interior location, I can control the lighting. I don't need to care about the weather. I can make sunshine if I have to. And that sense of doing things on that indie level was really helpful for me, because you simplify the story down to its essence, which again is kind of that curiosity. What's the mental machinery at work with these characters here? How can I portray that in a way that can be done simply so that we get a product? So that's where it started. And I think, like most filmmakers, we start making short films, but the dream is for a lot of us to make a feature-length film. So I got my chance to do that. I set myself a challenge. I said, I created a contest. I said, that for myself, if I could write a script in less than 10 days that was feature length, I'd give myself the prize, which was to be made to film it. And I did that. I wrote the script for It's About Love in about 6 days. And again, it takes all those constraints, positive constraints, into effect. Effectively, the action of the film takes place on a park bench, and characters come and go. And there was a certain amount of kind of almost mathematical logic in the character interactions. Again, what is their mental machinery? How is it bound to interact? The same way with CI, when you're doing profiling on someone, you look at their backstory, right? You see where they went to school, who they trained with, how they were taught to think. We can make inferences. And it was the same with the characters. So I'm always laughing because there's such a parallel between everything I've ever done and everything I do now. It's all usable, and no knowledge is ever wasted. I keep coming back, and I'm amazed at that. So, the CI person was writing that script because I was thinking profiling, I was thinking backstory, I was thinking what were the influences on this person and what is their mental machinery. So, which brings us to the pandemic, which we had talked about before. And suddenly it was not really feasible. It wasn't worth the risk to involve other people in making the film. So I went out, I literally took a chair and went out into the woods nearby in the park and sat down with a notebook. And I said, what could I do by myself that would still let me tell stories? And so I started to write. I eventually came up with this story, which would be told in multiple film fragments. And it's about the digital legacy of a disappeared artist and a piece of damaged AI code that becomes obsessed with tracking the digital legacy of this deceased or disappeared artist.
Wow.
And, well, thank you. It was just, it seemed kind of makeable. And, a lot of what we do in film is, if you're on the indie film side, is what's makeable. And that's what got me to where I am today, where I do most of the things I do by myself. I learned to edit. I sat beside good editors who were working on other films with me. I learned those various crafts, and now I can do simple things by myself. And that's a pandemic, kind of bonus in a way.
Thank you, COVID. Right?
Yay.
You learned a whole new skill set.
Yes, I'm sure everybody has. I mean, it has been such an adjustment.
You said something that triggered a recollection that I noticed on your IMDb profile, which is on the screen now. Constraint breeds ingenuity, and you sort of paraphrased it in what you were just talking about. How is that this source of innovation, that constraint is really the boundaries under which now our new operating posture really creates a new macro environment that we recalibrate our offer to, that we ultimately then produce value in the world, and then the byproduct of that value is wealth for the producer. Talk to me about that constraint breeds ingenuity thing.
Well, I think that constraint in the indie film world is the way of life. If you can make a film for, say, $500, you can probably make it for $100. You can probably make it for $50. You can pick up your phone and you can probably make it for no dollars. So what is the minimum amount, or if you want, what's the maximum constraint you can put around this project or idea and still have it succeed? So if you model it down to what's the minimum that's required to get the job done, I think we can often find that there's another way to tell stories. And an example I can think of is I was advising somebody on a script, and they wanted to have a pickup truck come into the scene, throw a bottle and have it smash, and have us see that. But there was constraints of budget and logistics and permits and all that kind of thing. And I was like, well, how about we just hear that stuff and we see the characters react and then talk about what just happened? And that's an example where, okay, if I say, how could you do it for less? How could you do it faster? How could you do it cheaper? Again, it's fast, cheap, and ethical. How can we do this, smallify it, and you kind of almost maximizing the constraints while still getting the message out there that you want to get out there? And if you find you cannot do it, and you're still subject to these constraints, then it probably wasn't the right project at the right time. You didn't want it bad enough at that particular point. Maybe there'll be other resources down the road, or maybe it'll be more doable later. But then you can then say, okay, I'm going to set that aside. What is a doable thing? What's an achievable, makeable, finishable thing? I'm a real believer in finishing. And I really am. And I'd rather do something that takes me 5 hours that is just dreadfully simplistic, but get it done and get it out there somehow, get it to a festival or something like that. So that's just a bias in me.
I think that's part of what I noticed in you at Yale, was that you have this sort of, and don't take this the wrong way, a promiscuous intellect who isn't necessarily in love with any one of your creations tomorrow, but right now they're your passion for whatever it is you're doing to try and bring that sort of to fruition, and then ultimately knowing that there's going to be a next one. And again, promiscuity is generally not something that we virtuize, but in that sense, a promiscuous intellect and really a promiscuous heart, promiscuous curiosity, maybe, is the way I should describe you.
Hey, I'll take that. As intended, and thank you. It's true. I am distressingly output focused, but I'm a recovering procrastinator. I was an epic procrastinator when I was going through my earlier education and stuff like that, to the point where, I would go beyond the point at which constraint could still allow an essay to get finished. So I would go off. As my dad said, it's not brinkmanship if you keep falling off. Little bit of early guidance that actually stuck with me. And then I just started to become like a rabid finisher. I just did an about face on that. And I don't recall any other thing happening that I just don't want to be in that situation again. I'd rather blow something off my desk right away. So you're absolutely right. I think that's a real innate trait with me now, is that I'm in for the finish. And, there's people that say, hey, how come you don't love the process more? Isn't it fun to be rolling up your sleeves and the actual doing? Honestly, for me, that's not usually the fun, because that's where all the risks are. That's when you have things like, is everybody going to show up? Is the equipment going to work? Is something going to go wrong in the middle of a shoot? It's many things, but that's not fun for me. Fun is done.
Yeah.
And when it's done, and then I can start something else.
Derek, I can see, has something he wants to drill down on you with, but before I have him do that, you might be wondering what this crazy QR code is on the screen, and that's what's known as a POAP redemption link. If you open your little POAP mobile app, you can scan that QR code, as I'm about to do right now, and it'll allow you to then go out and verify your humanity and download or claim that POAP token. So Rob, we'll make sure that we reserve one for you, since that particular QR code has probably just been scanned by someone on YouTube. And we're going to be saying goodbye to those folks on social here in a second. But before we jump from unthinkable to unspeakable, and Derek, you can take us over there, I wanted to show your NFT that you have pinned to the top of your Twitter profile, Skycat in Paris.
Right on. Thank you.
To get into unspeakable, feel free.
I was going to ask you, Rob, about going back to fun being done, and in a world of Web3, which I know very, very little about, how do you envision, whether it be the world of movie making or competitive intelligence, how do you believe that, and you shared an example with us through this Night Cafe studio of how you're able to utilize artificial intelligence to help create, I think off of a narrative documented story, how you can help to create an AI empowered visual element to that script, if you will. How do you see that kind of coming to life to enable the fun is done moment to occur quicker?
It's a great question, and I think it's the speed of it. To go back to when I was a kid, I was really interested in the idea. I was interested in computers, and in those days, that meant if you were lucky, you could get a kit. I think it was a Sinclair ZX81 or a Timex kit, and build your own little computer, and it had no onboard hard drive or anything at the time. So you could program it to do something simple you could play on your TV. What I wanted to be able to do was to create artificial worlds when I was a kid. That was really interesting to me, but the computing resources were not available to an ordinary person, particularly to a kid. And nowadays it's fantastic because you can actually build artificial worlds using these AI techniques. So if you want to talk about a cat seeing a vision of another cat in the sky on a dark blue night in Paris, boom, several seconds later, it's done. And what I love about that is, number one, it's unique. So basically, someone could put in those exact same words and get a different result, because that's the fun thing about working with artificial minds that I like is you teach each other. You find out what works, and the machine finds out what works. And the machine is always learning. So the machine would interpret those words differently because of what it's learned from all of the other people inputting similar concepts. So it's always, as a neural network, it's always kind of growing in its sophistication or its whimsicalness of making associations between words and turning them into what it thinks you are thinking. To me, that's really fascinating. So I really love that. It's a childhood dream come true. Now it's here, and I'm glad that I'm still here to appreciate that and have the fun I would have liked to have had when I was a kid. I would have totally been into games, 3D worlds. Had I grown up later, I would have loved that.
Mm-hmm. Really cool. Eric, take us over.
We have to say goodbye to our social streamers. Do svidaniya, robotov set Sovietskich. But we will be back here next Tuesday, so please join us.